Hey guys, hope you're all doing good. In this video, I'm going to be talking about functions with respect to Matlab and Octave. But before we do that, we are going to look at a simple mathematical function. So in engineering mathematics, I'm pretty sure you have come across something like y is equal to f of x, right? So basically f is actually a function, right, which takes x as an input. So this is an input. And then depending upon the function, it evaluates. Once the function is evaluated, the results are assigned to a variable called y, and this becomes the output. So for example, when we say y is actually a function of x, it could be that f of x is nothing but x square, right? So when you say that y equal to f of 1, then what we are going to do is we are going to take 1, multiply that by 1, and we are going to say that that is equal to y. Now this is called as a function which contains one input. Similarly, you can have a function which takes two inputs. An example for that is y equal to f of x comma y, which is nothing but x square plus y square. Alright, so and just to make a difference, I'm just going to call this as y1, so that y1 is equal to x square plus y square. So this is called as the function definition, right? So we are just defining what the function is. So I'm just going to call this as definition, and it's very important that you remember this because your programming is done very similar to this. Now if I have to use this function, right, then I have to call the function, right? So when I call the function, I need to basically pass in the right values. I can say that, you know, x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 2. So then what's going to happen is I can calculate this as 1 square plus 2 square. So this is going to be equal to 5, and that is going to be the value for y1. Alright, now similarly what I can do is I can have a function which has three inputs, x1, y1 and z1, right? And what is that function going to be? Well, that's going to be x1 square plus y1 square minus z1. Now this is again the function definition, and to call the function I can type in f of 1, 2, 5. Now this right here is called as calling the function. Alright, now there are so many things that you can learn here, right? So for example, when I type in 1, 2 and 5, you are automatically making the substitution in your head that x1 is going to be equal to 1, y1 is going to be equal to 2, and z1 is going to be equal to 5. In other words, you are matching the order of inputs with the order in which the function has been defined. And this is exactly what a computer program is also going to do. In other words, to call this function, if I type in 1, 2, 5, 6, it does not make any sense because the function expects only 3 inputs and you're providing 4 inputs. Just by looking at this, we know that this function is wrong. Similarly, a program is going to look at it. It's going to compare your function call with the function definition, and it's going to determine that you're doing something wrong, and it's going to throw you an error. So it is very important that when you call the function, the number of inputs that you provide and the order in which you provide the inputs are consistent. So let's refine this example a little bit more. For example, I'm just going to define a function called f1, and I'm just going to take two inputs, x comma y, and then I'm going to say that this function is going to return two values, right? y1 comma y2, right? So in other words, I have two outputs and I have two inputs, right? Where I'm going to say that y1 is equal to x plus y and y2 is equal to x minus y. So alright, so I have two inputs, I have two functions. Now note that the function name is f1. Now if I type in f of x comma y, then it kind of does not make sense because my function name is f1. So I need to use the same name while I call it. So I can type in something like f1 comma 5, and I can say that y1 comma y2 is equal to this. Then y1 is going to be 10 and y2 is going to be 0 according to the definition. Now from a programming point of view, the left hand side would actually be an array, right? So you'll have y1, y2, which is going to be an array, and this is going to be equal to f1 of 5, 5. Now what else can I do? Well, I can take this one step further. I can say that a is equal to 5 and b equal to 6. I can create two variables, and I can say that y1 comma y2 is equal to f1 of a comma b. Now we know that the value of a is 5, so that's going to be substituted here, and then similarly the value for b is going to be 6, and that's going to be substituted here, and these two values would be transferred to the function. So instead of x I will have 5, and instead of y I'll have 6, which means y1 is going to be 11 and y2 is going to be minus 1. In other words, when I define the function, the inputs are called as x and y, but when I'm calling it, I'm using different variables. This is perfectly fine. You don't have to have the same variables. So with that, let's go to Matlab and try practicing some examples. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the function keyword. I'm going to say that the function is y is equal to f1 of x, right? So that's going to be the function keyword, and I can use n function or just the n keyword, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that y is simply equal to x. All right, so now let's save this. Now remember, when you save the program, you need to make sure that the name of the file and the name of the function is exactly the same. This is very important, so make sure that you do this. Now if I try to run this program, what's going to happen is it says no input arguments are defined. So for example, if I have to call this function, I can type in f1 of 5. That's going to immediately return an answer of 5, because this function is going to return the output y, and y is nothing but y is equal to x. So let's save the program, run it one more time. All right, so I can type f1 of 5, and I can say that this is nothing but my result, right? Results equal to f1 of 5, and you can see that here the output variable is called as y, and here it's called as results. That doesn't matter, just the number of inputs and number of outputs should match. So what I can do is I can create a variable called a. I can type in a equal to 5, and I can go back, and instead of f1 of 5 I can type in f1 of a, and that's going to work as well. Now let's try increasing the inputs. I'm just going to input x, and I'm going to input x1, and I'm going to say that y equal to x, and y1 is equal to x plus x1. All right, and what I'm going to do is, since we have two outputs, right, we want to return both the two outputs, right? So if I just have y, right, if I just have one output, right, and if I forget, then what's going to happen is if I run the code, first of all I'm going to get an error. It says not enough input arguments. Why is that? Our function requires two inputs and I'm just giving it one input, so I'm going to define the second input as b, right? But the problem is I'm not defined b, correct? So when I hit enter, I'm going to get an error saying that the b is undefined. So I'm going to say that b is equal to 6, and then let's try running the program again. So this time you can see that a is 5 and b is 6, but I'm just getting the value for y, which is the first result. Y is equal to x, and since x is 5, the output value is 5, right? In other words, this y1 is not being returned at all. So we need to say that, hey Matlab, I want both y and y1 to be an output. How do I do that? Well, I can just use an array, and I can say y and y1 should be the output. Now let's run this particular program. Oops, sorry, I should not be running this. Let's just call this guy. And even now, I'm just getting only one output. Why is that? Well, if you remember, I said that the number of inputs and number of outputs should match. In this particular case, we have two inputs. So I should basically say result number 1 and result number 2 is equal to f1 of a comma b. Now when I execute this, I am getting the right response. Result 1 is 5 and result 2 is 11. So far what we have done is we have practiced this function and we have tested it using the command line. Now I'm going to be using this function inside a different program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my usual lines, clear all, close all, and CLC. And I'm going to say that a is equal to 5, b equal to 6. All right. And then I'm going to type in f1 of a comma b. And I'm going to say that y1 and y2 are equal to this. So now if I run this, you can see that y1 is 5 and y2 is 11. So it works perfectly fine. Now you need to remember that the function, right? f1.m and basics underscore matlab.m are exactly in the same folder. They are inside f:/matlab 2017 a/bin. So let me just copy this entire code. I'm going to create a new file. So let me create a new script. I'll paste it, and when it comes to save it, I'm going to save it in my desktop, and I'm just going to call this as basicstest.m, right? And when I execute this, Matlab is going to ask me to change my folder to my desktop, right? Because that's where the program is saved. When I hit change folder, I will get an error that f1 is undefined, right? That's because you need to understand that this function is actually in a different folder, so there is no way for Matlab to access it. So the only way you can make it to access is by making sure that your main program and your function program are in the same folder. The other thing that I want to show is I'm going to save this guy, and I'm going to create a copy of it in desktop, right? But this time I'm going to call it as 1f, and when I save it, I'm just going to call it as 1f.m, right? I've saved it. Now when you basically do this, Matlab will say that you cannot give this name. Matlab's names must start with a letter and only contain letters, numbers, or underscores. Now Matlab will give you this error, but Octave might not. Octave might allow you to do this, and your program will never run. That's because you have given the names incorrectly. So always remember that you should provide names that are purely text and do not have any spaces. Just use underscore. So for example, if your function is called f, you can type in f_1. That's perfectly valid. All right. The other thing that you should remember is you should stop using inbuilt names. For example, there is a command called lsode. So let us say that I'm saving my program as lsode.m, and I change my function name to lsode. So now if I type in lsode of 5,5, you can see that I'm getting the answer, right? That's because the current implementation, right? The current function that I'm using might overwrite a system function. Now in this case, it actually worked, right? Now let's try out a different name. Let's type in ODE45, which is actually a solver available in Matlab, right? You can see that function name ODE45 is known to Matlab. You get that error message. If you get this error message, that means you are basically giving the function a name that already is being used by Matlab. So you should never do this. In Octave, you might not get this error, right? So let's actually go ahead and save this guy using the save as command, and I'm going to call this ODE45.m, right? Now if I try ODE45 of 5,5, I am getting an answer. But what I have done is I have actually replaced the functionality ODE45. That's an inbuilt command. So if I type in doc ODE45, it's going to open up the documentation for the ODE45 commands. You can see that this is a completely different thing, and I have modified it for my purposes. This is actually bad. You should never do this. Whenever you get an error message saying that the function already exists, make sure that you give it a totally different name. So in this case, this is actually wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this guy. I'm going to search for ODE45.m, the function that I created. I'm going to right click and I'm going to delete this, right? Because this is wrong. What I'm also going to do is when I create a new function, I'm always going to make sure that I give it very specific names. So I'm going to give this function underscore Sarang. Right? So this way I am absolutely sure that such a function does not exist. And this is what you need to do when you're beginning with programming, right? Make sure that the function names are explicit, meaning when you read the function, it needs to be clear what that function does. In this case, function underscore Sarang doesn't mean anything, but I can have something called as function underscore example, which is a perfectly valid name, right? If you are writing a function to calculate, say, the area under the curve, then your function should be called as area under the curve. I know that typing in long names is hard, but especially when you're starting with programming, take the effort to do that because it will save you a lot of time. The other thing that I want to teach you about is scope. What does scope mean? So for example, I'm just going to save this guy as area under the curve, right? Let's just pretend that that's what this function does. And here I need to make sure that this is called as area under the curve. Now when I execute this, you can see that I have A, B, Y1 and Y2. They have all been calculated and I can see that in the workspace. But here you can see that I have variables called X and X1. Right? These variables are not available in workspace. Why is that? That's because when you're calling a function, the code would actually go inside it, and any variables that you are defined inside the function exist only when the function is still being executed. Once the function has executed, X and X1 will be deleted from the memory. In other words, I cannot access the value of the function X here. You will get a message that X is undefined, because once the function call is done, that is, once Matlab has executed line number 8, the value of X will get deleted. Similarly, here you are having A and B, right? You cannot access the value of A and B inside the function, right? So for example, I'm just going to print the value of A and B. If I execute the function, you can see that I'm getting a message undefined variable A and B, right? So make sure that you don't do this mistake. The other mistake that people sometimes do is, whenever they start a program, I say that you need to start with clear all, close all and CLC. Now this is perfectly fine, except that if I run the program, I'm going to get an error message. Why is that? Well, everything is being cleared, so there is no inputs for this function. So for example, let's just take this guy and put it inside the function, all right? And if I try to run this, you can see that a reference to a cleared variable, right? Whenever you see this message, most likely what's happening is you are having clear all, close all, CLC inside a function. What you're basically doing is you've cleared the inputs, X and X1. And because of that, Y and Y1 can never be calculated. So make sure that you don't do this as well. All right. Okay. So in this particular case, we have a function with 2 inputs. Now remember, you can have as many inputs as you want and as many outputs as you want. All right. With that, I would like to conclude this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.